Okay, folks, it's just after 1:35, so we're going to go ahead and jump into this. Welcome to Logic Model 101. This is for June 2021. I'm Tristan Kirkman, and this is from the Office of Out-of-School Time Grants and Youth Outcomes. First off, some introductions. I'm joined by a few of my colleagues today. I'm here with Alex Brown, our Communications Outreach Specialist, Jyothis Srikumar, another data analyst on the team, and Vania Bowie, one of our grants managers, our primary grants manager. So let's get ahead and jump into this. So some notes for the session. There's a few things that you can do for this. You can type in messages in the chat off on presumably the right side of your screen. If you're doing so, please send that to field to all panelists instead of just an individual person. That's one of the big ones. But first off, just to make sure that everybody here is actually able to see and hear me, I'm going to open up a quick poll just to see if you guys can see and hear me. So please let me know. We'll close this after about a minute. So if you can see and hear me, and you can see the poll popping up on your screen, please click that yes button. Okay, looks like most of you can see and hear me. So we're going to go ahead and get this started. So objectives today. So this presentation is focused on logic models, and our goal for this presentation is to provide you with an understanding of how to develop a program logic model and also how to use a logic model in ways that will be valuable to your program. We want the information here presented here to do more than just help you create a logic model in order to satisfy a compliance requirement. And we're hoping that this information will be useful to you in developing and using a logic model for your daily program operations, including your performance management and program evaluation activities. And as part of this, you're going to learn to describe and develop a logic model, and you're going to be able to understand the key terms and definitions related to logic models. And in particular, we're going to spend a bit of time focusing on differences between outputs and outcomes. So first off, we're going to go over that general overview. We're going to go through some terms and definitions. We're going to work on building your own logic model, and then we're going to close out on this. So what is the logic model in general? A logic model is a picture of how a program or initiative is supposed to work. It explains the strategic answer to the problem you're trying to solve. It includes explicit statements about the activities and the intended results of your program, and in general provides a common language and common point of reference across programs. And this will also be a mechanism for sharing with funders how the program or how your program will achieve the goals of your project. So developing a logic model has many potential uses. You're generating a clear and shared understanding of how your program is supposed to work, a logical explanation of the program model. It's to support program planning and improvement and serve as a foundation for evaluation. So in the first of those, logic models can be used to ensure that your stakeholders have a clear and shared understanding of how your program is intended to work. For example, sharing a program's logic model with program staff can be beneficial in generating a collective sense of responsibility and accountability, as it enables staff to understand how their specific role fits into the broader context of your program. Logic models can also be used to support program planning and improvement efforts by being a program management tool to help you determine how to allocate resources effectively, as well as serve as a framework to monitor whether your program is being implemented according to plan. And for evaluation, these can help programs determine when and what to evaluate so that evaluation resources are used effectively and efficiently. So next up, we're going to go through some terms and definitions. So as we get deeper into logic models, we're going to be using a few common terms: inputs or resources, activities, outputs, and outcomes. First up are inputs, which are resources that go into a program, including human, financial, organizational, and community resources available for carrying out a program's activities. This can include funding, program staff, volunteers, research, whatever you need for your activities. Next up, we have these activities in general. These are your program activities and actions or events provided to generate your desired outcomes. There are a couple other sort of sub-definitions that we use within activities. Dosage refers to the amount of time or number of activities. Services, the provision of resources, knowledge, and goods. Opportunities refer to the availability, situation, chance, or event that may not normally be an option for your attendees. Supports, these are interpersonal relationships addressed by expectations, guidance, and boundaries. And evidence-based practices, which are processes in which research is used to guide and inform the delivery of your services. Outputs are the direct product of your program's activities, and they include indicators of specific items of information that track program success on outcomes measures, and benchmarks, numerical goals that measure program performance against certain intervals. And we're going to get a lot more into outputs a little bit later on. So outcomes. These are the measurable, meaningful, and expected changes in the program participants that result from a program activities. And these include goals, what participants will achieve by the end of the program, and targets, so specific, well-defined, and measurable goals. So here we have a basic example of how a logic model can work. Logic models can be formatted in many different ways, but a common format is to simply be read from left to right. These are read from inputs to outcomes, employing an if-then sequence among the key components. If your program has these inputs or resources, it can carry out these activities. If your program carries out these activities, then it can produce these outputs. If your program has produced these outputs, then it will achieve these outcomes. In addition, a logic model has two sides generally. The process side focuses on a program's implementation or its planned work, inputs, resources, activities, and outputs. These are the direct products. The outcome side of the logic model describes the expected sequence of changes that the program is to accomplish, which can be short-term, medium-term, or long-term changes. And the outcome side reflects what differences the program intends to make. So on this slide and the next two slides, we'll see example logic models for three different organizations. Once again, these are arranged to show that if a program has X inputs or resources, then it can carry out Y activities and activities. If they carry out these activities, then it will generate these outputs, and if it has produced these outputs, it will achieve these outcomes. So if we've got our logic model in front of us, the inputs in this case, we have workshop facilitators, curricula, facilities, which are the necessary inputs to produce a life skills workshop with various dosage and specific activities beneath that. And the outputs of that life skills workshop and various activities are personal budgets from the students and a checklist for the students and written out goals for college and career readiness. These are sort of the direct products of the program itself. The outcomes on the short term are that youth would gain sort of awareness of the importance of goal setting and learning time management, learning techniques and financial responsibilities related to achieving their college and career goals. In the midterm, they develop written goals and create timelines for achieving steps toward their goal. And in the long term, that they make progress on their college and career goals and achieving the first few steps on their timeline. Here's another example, similar, but like a little bit more filled out. Again, we have our inputs, which can include the workshop, the workshop presenter, facilities, computers and labs, buses, staff, and these are all necessary inputs for college preparation activities or guest speaking activities or college tour activities. And those produce direct outputs, things like the number of students that participated in college tours, or the number of students who have completed those particular workshops. And the outcomes in this case, we have, in the short term, youth just being aware of college options and the requirements for admission and for completing financial aid forms. In the midterm, they've got some specific behaviors where they are identifying a list of colleges that are a good fit for them. And in the long term, we're hoping that they are accepted and matriculate in college. And one more example. So in this case, we have inputs of, say, guest speakers and industry trainers. We've got curricula that are prepared ahead of time, facilities, and monthly stipends as financial resources. Again, for activities, we've got focus on career preparation, where the inputs provide the necessary scaffolding for those activities. This can include guest speakers from local growth industries, internships, employment readiness workshops. And the outputs, the direct outputs from these activities are, say, the number of students who completed trainings in workplace email guidelines, or the number of students who developed resumes as part of the program activities, or the number of students who complete a particular internship. The hopeful outcomes of this program are that youth initially, in the short term, are aware of the potential careers in their local growth industries. In the midterm, that they're developing the skills necessary to secure employment, and in the long term, that they live a life with a living wage. Another way of thinking about logic models is to use a reverse approach. So this approach starts with the desired outcomes and works backward to develop activities and inputs. The reverse approach asks the question, but how, as you move from the desired outcomes to identifying the inputs that lead to these outcomes in your logic model. Using a nutrition assistance program as an example, the reverse logic model approach shown here starts with the program's long-term outcomes of increasing the number of healthy families and works backward to determine how the program will achieve this outcome. So if you want improved family health, how do you do that? You need an increase in families using healthy food practices. Well, how do you do that? Well, individuals need to gain knowledge of healthy food choices. How do you do that? You need families to complete educational workshop series. How do you do that? Well, let's conduct 4 2-hour educational workshops per month. But how? Well, you need funding and program staff and volunteers and research. So we're going to work on building a logic model for your own program next. So here is a basic template that we like to use. It's not specifically required, but it's one that that is provided for you. This is available at learn24.dc.gov/funding opportunities and can be downloaded as a Word document for you to manipulate. And just for fun, I'm going to throw in a link to the chat for attendees, and this will get you direct to that download. So today we're going to be focusing on a comprehensive logic model. So this includes not just the inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes, but also includes a few other components that can help guide the process and provide a better overall picture of your program. So this comprehensive logic model also includes your program's mission statement, the challenge that your program hopes to address, the assumptions that guide your program, and what external factors might influence your program's success. And so this logic model template is one that your program can use when submitting a grant application. And you can, again, review that in more detail by selecting the link that I've posted in the chat. And so over the next few minutes, we're going to be going over each of these components in detail. So first, we're going to start with the sort of broader goals of your program, encapsulated as a mission statement. So as part of this, you'll need to note your program's target population and how you hope to impact that population in general terms. For this, you include the name and description of your program. And so an example of this is to inspire and motivate youth from low-income and first-generation college-bound families, that's the population of interest, to achieve social and economic success by providing guidance, encouragement, and support in obtaining a college degree. Again, there's focusing on the population that you're intending to serve and the specific path that you're hoping to do so. So next, we'll narrow down that specific challenge in the target population. So an effective problem statement will describe the nature of the problem and the difficulties facing the people you serve. It's based on current research or authoritative data, is specific and provides measurable indicators or demonstrated proof of the issue's existence, and clearly shows that the need is important. So to get a better idea of what an effective problem statement looks like, let's compare these two examples. Now, in the stronger example, we can see that the target population and challenge to be addressed within that problem. The challenge is described in detail using measurable indicators and supported by research, and explains why the challenge is important. So in developing your own program's problem statement, there are a few other things to consider as well. Because organizations are invested in their programs, they tend to editorialize a little bit about the need for the project and sort of what is wrong with society, and then close with a broad statement of how fortunate it is that their agency exists. If you imagine yourself as a foundation reviewer who is sifting through piles of proposals with similar editorial comments, trying to decipher truth from hyperbole can be a little bit difficult. You can make their job easier by using objective information to verify the need for your programs. So census data, school district test scores, police reports, survey data, research studies, and other similar information legitimize your organization's claim that there is a need. Information can be obtained from your city's planning office, issue-related research organizations such as the Kids Count, local universities and colleges, a business or government section of your local library, newspaper articles, the internet, whatever you like. Statistics that your organization has gathered related to your proposal are also valuable, as long as they're not distorted. Sometimes quotes from a recognized local or national authority can also be used to support your needs statement. And even though sometimes you're citing information that evokes images of intense suffering, try to avoid being negative about the problem. Your funders are looking for solutions, and your organization's skill in being a part of that solution. So next, we're going to be going over how your program will attempt to address the problem that you've identified. So again, the first key component of logic models is inputs, which we've discussed previously. These are the resources that your program will use to carry out your program's activities. Funding, staff, volunteers, etc. Our inputs allow us to conduct our activities. Activities, generally referred to as program activities, are the actions or events provided to generate the desired outcome. So when including activities in your logic model, you should also include the dosage, how many of the intervention will students receive, or how much time will be allocated to a particular activity. So for a hypothetical nutrition assistance program, its activities might include conducting healthy food workshops, hosting Q&A sessions with nutritionists, food preparation training services, taking participants on a site visit to a supermarket, or referring participants to food programs and resources. Activities produce the outputs components of a logic model. Outputs are what a program's specific activities will create or produce, providing evidence of service delivery. And these are often described numerically or quantified in some way. For example, outputs associated with our nutrition assistance program might include the specific number of individuals who attended a healthy food workshop, or the specific number of individuals who received food preparation training services, or the specific number of individuals who received a referral to food programs and resources. Sorry about that. So from outputs, we move to outcomes. Outcomes are the specific changes that may result from a program's activities or intervention. A program's outcomes follow in continuum, ranging from short-term to long-term results. Short-term outcomes are often considered changes in beneficiaries' knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Medium-term outcomes generally refer to changes in behavior or action that result from a beneficiary's new knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And long-term outcomes are characterized as changes in condition or status in life that result from that beneficiary's new behaviors or actions. So it's important to note that describing outcomes as short, medium, or long-term also depends on the objective, the length of the program and the expectations of the program or intervention. What is identified as a long-term outcome for one program could be a medium-term outcome for another. Your logic model should reflect your program's theory of change and the sequence of changes necessary to accomplish your program's long-term results. So using our hypothetical nutrition assistance program again, in the short term, individuals are expected to increase their knowledge in healthy food choices. This change in knowledge is expected to lead them to actually adopt healthy food practices, a behavioral change that represents a medium-term outcome. This, in turn, is expected to lead to an increase in families' overall household food security, the hope for long-term outcomes of the program. So something that may be useful when determining your outcomes is to consider the developmental youth outcomes approach. The youth development approach begins with an intentional program design to define youth outcomes. Youth outcomes are the attitudes, knowledge, or behaviors that the program hopes all youth in the program will achieve as a result of participation in the program. And these are 12 different developmental youth outcomes in 2 categories: identity and ability. Within each category, there are 6 attributes, and a quality program will be designed to achieve and measure at least 2 of these: safety and structure, self-worth, mastery and future, belonging and membership, responsibility and autonomy, and self-awareness and spirituality on the identity side. And on the ability side, things like physical health, mental health, intellectual ability, employability, civic and social ability, and cultural ability. So to summarize, outcomes, again, are the specific changes that may result from a program's activities or intervention. Program's outcomes fall in a continuum, ranging from short-term to long-term results. Short-term outcomes are considered changes in beneficiaries' knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Medium-term outcomes refer to changes in behavior or action that result from those beneficiaries' new knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And long-term outcomes are characterized as changes in condition or status in life that result from a beneficiary's new behaviors or actions. So if we have an increase in awareness of STDs, then that might decrease the risky sexual behavior of certain youth. And if that behavior occurs frequently, then you might have the long-term change in condition of lowered diagnosis rates. So we're going to take a minute to highlight some of the differences between outputs and outcomes, as these 2 components are often confused with each other. So on the left side of the slide, you can see that the program outputs are direct products of a program's activities and services. Outputs quantify the services that were delivered. Program outcomes, on the other hand, quantify the changes a program intends to bring about as a result of a program's activities or intervention. And so while the outputs are essential elements that enable change, they don't represent benefits or changes in and of themselves. So outputs can be attending workshops, receiving services, receiving referrals. These aren't producing may lead to the outcomes that you're looking for, but they aren't the outcomes themselves, which might say include knowledge of healthy food practices, adoption of healthy food practices, and an overall increase in food security. So think about this statement: students have developed resumes. Is this statement more likely to be an output or an outcome? And I'm going to open up a poll real quick, and I'd like to hear your feedback and what you guys think. got about another 20 seconds left for those who haven't answered yet. Right. So most of you thought this was an output, and a couple of you thought it was an outcome. This is an output. This would be something that occurs as part of your program activities of, say, developing resumes. And students developing developing a resume as part of your program would be a direct output of that. The outcome of, say, getting a job later on, that would be an outcome that might result from this output, but the creation of the resume itself as part of program activities would just be a direct output. And if you have questions about this, this is a great time to jump into the chat and clarify things if you need. So what about this one? Students decrease their high-risk sexual behavior. Is this more likely to be an output or an outcome? So most everybody said this was an outcome, and that is the correct part of this. It is a midterm outcome generally of a behavior that results from the program activities, a change in behavior. So what about students being satisfied with program offerings? Is this more likely to be an output or an outcome?
Hey Tristan, just so you know, a question just came in through the chat, through the question and answer, and it said, "How do you measure outcomes?" I'm not exactly sure if you want to touch on this yet, or if you are going to touch on this in a second. So I just figured I'd throw that question out to you, and then.
Sure. Well, the main thing is that will depend on the nature of the outcome you're trying to achieve. That will be different from program to program, and the length of the outcome and the intensity of the outcome that you're trying to go for. They may not always be immediately measurable by you, but they should at least be measurable in theory or in general. So even if you don't have direct access to whether or not, say, a program attendee attends college, that is an outcome that can be measured. All right, so we've got some answers to our test question here. Seems like most people thought this was an outcome and a few thought it was an output. So this is an output. Students being satisfied with your program outcomes offerings isn't, say, a short-term or a medium-term or a long-term outcome. This doesn't change their status or condition or their behaviors. This is, say, the direct output of, say, a satisfaction survey at the end of an activity. This is a direct product of program activities rather than something that indicates a change in your program participants. We're going to do one more of these. For students improving their reading skills and abilities, is this more likely to be an output or an outcome?
Okay, Tristan, I just have another question that just came in the chat as well. And it says, so my question is, what is the difference between impact outcome and which is more important to measure?
Between impact and outcome? Well, we haven't gone over direct impact of that. I mean, your program will have differing amounts of impact on your outcome. And exactly we want to measure that outcome. And the measurement of that outcome will provide a measure of the impact that your program had on that outcome potentially. All right, we're gonna close this real quick. It seems everybody thought this was a outcome, and that is correct. This is a outcome. This is a change in their abilities of the student. So next we're going to go over some details to help you develop your own intended outcome statements for your program. So we have, again, long-term, medium-term, and short-term. So for long-term, how long do you track your program participants after leaving your program? 6 months, 6 years? Yeah. And if programs got the fullest extent of the benefit of your program, what conditions or status would they have achieved? Or what significant change or impact will occur that wouldn't have occurred without your program? For the midterm, you can think about the halfway point of your program. So like 6 months for a 1-year program or 6 months after. You know, what behaviors, skills, and actions do you want your participants to exhibit? And where should they be in relation to those longer-term conditional and life status outcomes? For the short term, a general rule is 0 to 3 months, and this is participants at the very end of your program. So what awareness, knowledge, or attitude do you want participants to gain as a result of your program and intervention? So now that we've covered some outcome stuff, we're going to moving on to some of the final pieces of our comprehensive logic model, assumptions and external factors. So first, assumptions. So assumptions are the beliefs that you have about your program, the people involved, and how you think change will occur. So this gets into the theory behind your program and the underlying beliefs about how and why it will work. So documenting the assumptions behind a program and behind the logic model is a good way to make implicit assumptions explicit. So this can serve to ensure that all staff and stakeholders have a common understanding of how your program will actually work. And this also includes, the conditions necessary for your program to work. So assumptions that your program might make, if you were, say, that hypothetical nutrition program could be, if people have knowledge of healthier food choices and how to prepare those foods, then they will make healthier food choices. That's one of the basic assumptions of it. Or if the program is able to bring healthy food options to food deserts and provide nutrition stipends, it will lead to greater food security for the community. That's sort of a basic assumption behind the program. So I'm going to be talking about external factors. So external factors are the factors that might influence your ability to do the work that you planned, and the factors that might influence the change in your community or participants. This also specifically includes the potential barriers to achieving the change you desire. So examples of external factors that might affect the success of that nutrition assistance program. They would need to convince small grocery stores in the community to carry healthier options. If that doesn't work, that could impact the effectiveness of their program. Political or governmental changes might result in a reduction in the nutrition stipends they could offer. These external factors that are outside of their control could still influence the success of their program. So now that we've covered all the key components of our comprehensive logic model, let's look at an example. So this is a logic model for a fictitious organization called The Challenge. They do college and career readiness. So as you can see in the program mission statement, they summarize in broad terms what their target population is, young adults in Ward 10, and how they hope to impact that population, to prepare them for living wage employment. In their challenge statement, they are specific regarding the nature of their problem and refer to it using measurable indicators. For inputs, they list the resources they require. And for activities, they list their specific services and include the dosage or frequency of those services. For outputs, they list the direct products of their planned activities. For example, the number of students that completed their college readiness and SAT prep activity. For outcomes, they include short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. For short-term outcomes, they focus on knowledge and awareness, being aware of college and career options. For intermediate outcomes, they focus on measurable behaviors and actions resulting from those short-term outcomes using indicators such as grades, SAT scores, college acceptance rates. And for the longer-term outcomes, they highlight the change in their participants' life conditions that would result from their expected intermediate outcomes. Additionally, they list the necessary assumptions for their program to function as intended, such as that their theory of student success and having adequate access to funding. At the bottom, they show the external factors that could negatively affect their program success, such as the possibility of funding reductions and youth dropouts. So at this point, you should hopefully have a reasonable understanding of how logic models work and how you might be able to develop one for your own program. So an important step in finalizing your logic model is to verify or assess whether the model that you've created reflects an appropriate level of detail, is plausible, is realistic, and that there is consensus among key stakeholders that the model accurately reflects your program. So one way to verify your model meets these criteria is to run through a series of questions, such as the ones on this slide. Does your logic model include all the key program components? Do those components logically flow? It's also important to consider how realistic your program assumptions are. One thing to note is that it's okay to identify longer-term outcomes for your program, even though it may not seem feasible for you to measure the cause and effect relationship between your intervention and your longer-term outcomes. In verifying your logic model, it's more important to ask whether it's reasonable to assume that the program can achieve the expected short to long-term outcomes. You should also aim to achieve consensus among your program stakeholders regarding your model and its intended results. You may want to involve other program staff who are not involved in developing a logic model, as well as other external stakeholders to help you verify your model. So as we conclude today's presentation, there's a few things that we'd like to highlight as well to keep in mind as you work to develop and use your own program logic model. So developing a logic model is not completed in one session or by yourself. It's with a lot of people involved. There is no one best logic model. There are lots that can work. And logic models represent intention. We want to underscore that logic models reflect planned activities and outcomes and should be supported by an underlying theory of change. But in practice, programs may not only operate quite differently, but also produce unintended results. And an evaluation helps identify how faithfully a program actually adheres to its model. A program logic model is also not static. It can and should be changed and refined as the program changes and develops. Your programs don't need to evaluate every single aspect of a logic model. A good number if you can, but having the extreme detail of every single aspect isn't necessary. And logic models play a critical role in informing those evaluation and materials and what you're planning on doing for that, and building the evidence base for your program. Well, that's all we're planning on covering today. So as we close out the presentation, this is a perfect time for questions. And we'd also like you to let us know in the chat box what's something that you've learned from today's training. And after that, we'll take any questions you might have. Whenever you're ready, just post stuff in the chat box and we'll start getting to it. So it looks like we've got one question at least regarding teaching critical thinking, and critical thinking being a short or medium or long term or all three. Developing critical thinking is, of course, a very long-term goal, but also generically in the short term, we would expect that to be a change in knowledge, awareness, or attitudes. The midterm outcome of that might be a change in behavior. Maybe they make better decisions as a result of those critical thinking processes. And again, in the longer term, those critical thinking skills might result in better life outcomes and better life conditions for your program participants. Okay, I think that's all the ones that I'm seeing. Alex, are there more that I should be aware of?
So I see one person that said thanks for hosting. I appreciated the clarification on why satisfaction surveys are categorized as outputs. So that was one thing that somebody has learned, and I do have a question for you, but I don't know if you want to answer that right now, or we still are waiting to find out additional items that people may have taken away or learned from today's training.
Well, we can take both. While people are answering what people have learned, then we can answer questions as well.
Okay, sounds good. So somebody said, my challenge with measuring or reporting outcomes is one, if I'm teaching coding to a third grade, to third graders, the outcomes may be short or medium or long term or all three. Critical thinking is not that cut and dry, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with the critical thinking answer. In terms of teaching coding and teaching specific behaviors, you're teaching, first off, say, coding knowledge. A behavior might be that they write their own script, and a life change, a long-term outcome might be that they achieve a high-paying job because of their ability to use those script behaviors for their work.
Okay, sounds good. So as of right now, that's all the questions and comments that I have currently. But please feel free to continuously add your questions or comments or things that you've learned from today's training.
Okay. If we don't have any more questions, then maybe we can get out of here a little bit earlier. If you can, we have a evaluation that we are hoping that folks might be able to take, and I'm going to post that in the chat. Please take this, let us know how we did, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have more questions, we'll stick around for a little bit and answer as well as we can.